starting.
Good evening, everybody. Sorry for the slight delay in getting things going. We've had a bit of a technical issue with trying to get Jonathan Stevens on as our chair for this evening. But I'd like to introduce you to I think it's our inaugural webinar for the Southwest, but it's sort of a Bluetongue information update. So we're very lucky to have 3 speakers with us this evening. We have Rebecca Gristy from the APHA. We have Katie Evans, who is a sheep farmer from East Anglia, who's got some experience with Bluetongue. And we have Charlotte Mouland, who is a large animal vet based in Dorset with Synergy Farm Health, who's going to give a vet perspective. So without ado, if Rebecca is able to share her screen, I'd like to hand over to Rebecca, who's going to give us a bit of an update from the APHA.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring my books to the top. Okay, I'm going to need somebody just to confirm you can see my screen.
We can, yes, thank you.
As a slideshow, because thank you. So I've lost contact with you now, but I know that you're there. Great, smashing. Okay.
Sorry, Rebecca.
Sorry.
Sorry, Rebecca. Just before you kick off, I forgot to say there is a question and answer section. If you click on the question and answer link at the bottom of your screen, people can ask questions which we will then endeavour to answer at the end of the presentations, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Just say good evening, and thank you very much for joining this evening. And I hope you find this useful to give an update on Bluetongue. So, as Ian said, my name is Rebecca Gristy. I'm veterinary head for field delivery in APHA. So I'm not a policy person. I was in practice and then in the field doing the field work as a vet in APHA, and I've now just moved into the veterinary head role. I cover the Western region, so including the Southwest, and we go up to Shropshire. So we've had quite a lot of experience now with dealing with Bluetongue on a national, as it's been creeping across the country, and what we've needed to do to try and protect our heavy livestock areas in the West. Right, so basically I start here at the top. So this is what we're talking about, this little virus. It's not a very big virus, but it's in the family of viruses that are transmitted by vectors, insect vectors. So in Bluetongue, it's the biting midges, which are the culicoidy type of midges, which are present in just every continent. There's a type of culicoid midge. There are about 29 recognised serotypes of Bluetongue. You'll be familiar with, we're calling this one Bluetongue number 3, the BTV3. For some of you might remember that back in 2007, 2008, we were dealing with BTV8, but altogether 29 as far as we know. Probably that'll increase as viruses tend to adapt and become, reform. They all present slightly different. Some of them are more of a concern than others. Some of them really show no clinical signs at all. But the vaccines are specific for the type of Bluetongue serotype. At the moment, we don't have any multivalent. That might be something that develops, but they've got to be targeted. So if you've got, for Bluetongue 3, you need a Bluetongue 3 vaccine. And this is the little bugger who is causing and spreading the disease. So this is a culicoidy midge, obviously massively magnified. I mean, it does look a bit threatening there, but these are very capable of transmitting and carrying the virus. They don't get, they themselves don't get affected by it. So just, I said 29 So this is showing how these different sera these sera types sort of get bundled. Some of them are more similar than to others. You can see Bluetongue 3 is here sitting in this. Do you see my cursor, Ian, Aaron? Does anybody see my cursor?
Yes.
You
yes,
can. Cool.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Good. Okay, so you can see Bluetongue 3 sitting here. It's got a red line underneath it, which means it's got a vaccine. We have a vaccine. There is a commercial vaccine for Bluetongue 3. Bluetongue 8 was in this group here, but and you can see we also had the vaccine, which was a very effective vaccine that really stamped out Bluetongue in 2007, 2008. But we didn't have any cases, and it didn't overwinter. So. Okay, so back to the affected animals. As you know, cattle, sheep, but also goats, camelids, deer. One of the recent cases that we've had and confirmed Bluetongue is in some farm deer. But cattle, their preference is to bite cattle. It's obviously a bigger food source. It's got easier for the midge to access the skin than sheep, and it's a really important reservoir for keeping high levels of virus over winter. So that's something that the cattle have more of a role in overwintering when the virus hides inside the animals. Oh, yes. So this is just, some of you might be familiar with this. So there's been a lot of information about Bluetongue over the last couple of years as we've been getting used to this really quite concerning, worrying situation. It doesn't affect large number of animals, as you know, often individual animals on farm, but there's a lot of things that are coming to light. I won't make any excuse to say there's a lot of question marks in my presentation, in any answers that we can give. There's still a lot of unknowns. It is an evolving situation, and there's a lot of research going on, and we gained an awful lot of information, but still a lot of unanswered questions. But the transmission, let me focus on the transmission cycle in this main part of the screen, which is what we are more familiar with. So we have an infective host. So that's it could be something that's overwintered. It could be just an animal that's been infected by a midge carrying the virus. But this animal now has got virus circulating in its blood. It gets bitten by let's call a clean midge, and the midge sucks up the blood. Incubation period in the midge is an important period of time. So we sometimes call this an extrinsic incubation period, because that means it's outside of the animal, and the virus has to mature. The virus itself has to mature in the midge before if the midge then bites another animal, for that animal to be infected. If it's just the same day, it doesn't matter. We give it 4 to 20 days. The virus now has matured, and then if it bites the next animal, the midge bites the next animal, that animal then will become infected. May or may not show clinical signs, that just depends. And then within a few days, that virus is then circulating in that animal, and around it goes. These side pictures are just to remind us that this is not the only way it's transmitted, but it's by far the most common. It can be transmitted through semen, germplasm, embryo transfer, movement of animals. This is in the bottom corner here is abortion material. So it can vary, but these are all much lower risk, and obviously can be controlled. Products can be tested, and that the level of transmission is very much lower. We put a picture there of a needle in, because iatrogenic, which means being sort of transmitted inadvertently on needles. So that if you're not using needles between animals, so there's traces of blood, it can be iatrogenically transmitted. TB testing, as a requirement of TB testing, you'll be aware that the needle has to be treated with spirit between every animal, so that'll help stop transmission between animals. So don't worry too much about that. But this bottom here is a transmission through wind. We'll come on to that in a moment. This slide, don't worry too much about the detail of the slide, but this is just to show that just going between animal to animal via the midge is a complex process. It's all what we talk about is the competence of the biting midge. So this will depend on what happens within the midge, the maturity of the virus, and that's temperature dependent. It also, there's factors around the midge's own life cycle, about winter survival in larvae. It's about how long the midges last, depending on the climate, weather, temperatures. It's a complex situation, and so for the midge to become competent at transmitting. But the issue is that there's not to infect an animal. You don't need really many midges at all. I reckon only maybe 1 or 2 bites of a midge. A competent midge would mean that animal is infected. So it's very efficient at going from animal to animal if all these environmental factors are lined up. So what does it actually do? I won't spend too long on this, but it's useful, I think, to know that the virus likes to settle out. It looks for the small blood vessels, the lining of the small blood vessels. It causes, in this picture down here, it causes thickening, it causes vasculitis, it causes inflammation of the blood vessels, and that means that it can constrict the blood flowing through. It also makes those vessels really quite friable. So when you've got blood vessels quite near the surface, you'll get bleeding, you'll get lack of oxygen carriage, you'll get inflammation, you'll get edema, swelling, you get fluid coming out of the blood vessels. And this is particularly seen in the areas where you might get like mechanical damage or abrasion. So that's why we see, lesions around the gums, around the coronary bands. And this here at the moment, this arrow, double-ended arrow here is just to show the difficulty here. We've got this huge range of presentations of this disease, from no signs at all, maybe might be positive on blood tests, but no signs, no clinical signs, to death. So it's a very complicated disease sometimes to identify, and clinically it really has to be confirmed on blood tests because it's a tricky one. Just very quickly, these are some pictures of cases that we've seen in the 2004 outbreak. You'll have seen these pictures on posters and lots of the websites, some really classic pictures of this damage to the blood vessels. I've put in there, I don't even know if that's real, but that's meant to be a Bluetongue. And as we know, the Bluetongue, the Bluetongue, which would be cyanosis or ischemia, because you've got no blood, very poor blood flow, is actually very, very rare. Cattle, clinical signs are usually less severe, although I say the cattle are very important for harbouring the virus within their blood system. We'll come on a little bit later on about the reproductive problems that we know, and that's something that is an evolving area, and like you, I'm sure, that you will be concerned about some of the news coming out about the reproductive concerns about Bluetongue. Quite a lot we know of. We are still finding out more about that, but I'll come on to that in a moment. This is from the outbreaks that we are monitoring, cases we're monitoring through the recent outbreaks. These are the symptoms, the top 10, top 11 of what we see in cattle and sheep. Both most common see reluctance to move. Obviously, that might be due to pain because of lesions in the feet. It might also be because they're feeling miserable, they've got a high temperature, so they're reluctant to move. Before I move on to the next slide, just want to say that this has caused a challenge, as I say, clinically, presentation. We don't, although we've got a pretty good idea about this range of symptoms, we're always on the lookout to make sure we don't get caught unawares of foot and mouth disease. It is a differential. These lesions are not These more are like abrasions we get on the with Bluetongue rather than vesicles, but vesicles we get more in foot and mouth. But with the increased number of the spread of foot and mouth in Europe, we are on heightened awareness that we, you know, is this have we got clinical Bluetongue, or how do we be really careful we don't miss foot and mouth? You may or may not be aware that back in 2007, 2008, when we had the Bluetongue 8 circulating, the first case of Bluetongue was actually a report case for foot and mouth, because we were coming out of that smaller outbreak that we had down in the southeast of foot and mouth, not the big 2001 one, but the later one. And that was still active. And one of those later cases, they were the vets were called out to investigate what they thought could have been a foot and mouth, was actually turned out to be Bluetongue. So there was a bit of an overlap there, which was obviously we've got to be careful. So Bluetongue, I'll remind you later on, it needs to be reported. Suspicion still needs to be reported. We need to know what's happening in case we miss something, or whether the other serotypes are in circulation. So just okay, I'm going to move on now to a bit more about the arrival of Bluetongue 3. So we're really focusing on the current outbreak, and certainly related to climate change, not only, but certainly that's now been certainly recognised that the movement of Bluetongue has certainly got, with climate change, has certainly made a difference to us and to other countries. This is an old slide, but I think it's interesting. The blue lines, the northern blue line here and the southern blue line, is really the extent of Bluetongue that we would have expected back in that 2006, something like that. All these C and all these Latin words here are the midges. So Culicoides imicola is the midge, the culicoid midge that we get. Well, we get several actually, but the imicola is probably the most common. And then these numbers here are the different serotypes of Bluetongue that have come later on. So the blue line, this blue line, wiggly blue lines across the continents, is where the extent back in 2006, and then these circles is where the Bluetongue on the back or inside of the midge has moved beyond these boundaries up into Northern Europe, down into Australia, over in the last around 2010, 2011. And then bringing us a bit more further up to date, the picture is showing the distribution of Bluetongue. We've got obviously North Africa there and Tunisia, and then we've got Southern Europe, we've got Northern Europe, we've got Scandinavia, and we've got well into the UK. This is not an old disease. Sorry, this is not a new disease. It's new to us, but historically, it was probably recorded about 150 years ago in South Africa, but it's shifted. So how did it arrive? Again, this is something you might be aware of. This is some modelling and mapping from done by the Met Office. These are plumes of midges that could have, because of the prevailing wind coming in from Northern Europe or over into Denmark and into Scandinavia, even, about how these the incursions back in this was in 2023, where they could have come from, and the different colours is just the high risk, but obviously right up against that southeast coast, but very feasible, with a slight change of direction coming into the southwest coast. And this is following now where our surveillance, we've been doing a lot of surveillance over the winter months because of these basically risk areas. I thought you might be interested. I found this quite interesting. This is a satellite image, okay, of obviously you can probably recognise that's Italy, and this is going to be North Africa. But this is sand, okay. This is not midge, but this is dust and sand blowing off the Sahara. So you can see how those plumes of sand and dust have come very, very feasible to cross the Mediterranean and the islands and whatever. So if sand and dust can do it, then certainly midges carrying viruses could do that too. Just going to focus a little bit on the Netherlands. The Netherlands have got a very complete set of data, and they not only Netherlands, but a lot of interest has been looking at how the disease has developed, because they've had a very, very high number of cases. Basically, looking at how the disease itself could follow, help to try and get some prediction of what might happen in other neighbouring countries. So France and Germany have followed actually a similar pattern and could potentially do the same for us, which is so far coming sort of very following. Well, it looks like it's going the same way, but it is still predictions. But we've been using data collected from Holland over the last couple of years. So started in a very small number of cases in September 2023. By the end of the year, large number of cases. The different, as you can see from the legend there, these are the different species. But because of their high density, they've got lots of their holdings are very close together. The midge doesn't have to travel very far to spread. And then into 2024, vaccine was introduced, became available in May. They focused on sheep, but the virus was certainly established in cattle, which was then becoming as a reservoir and potential issue for infecting sheep as well. High number of cases developed, spreading very quickly through the year. The population, this is a number that's been reported, decreased by 20%. I think we would need to probably drill down a little bit more into that percentage, because they reckon that quite a number of that increase in the mortality was due to Bluetongue, but maybe not only Bluetongue. So I think we have to be a little bit careful about how we consider that 20%. But certainly vaccination has reduced mortality. But what's happening this year, so there's still a lot of monitoring going on to see what happens next. So back into the UK, we are lagging behind Northern Europe, but the pattern of disease is very worrying. So back in November 2023, we had these early cases, which, as you have seen from those earlier pictures, had come over in incursions with the wind blowing in the right direction from Northern Europe. And very predictably, these were the outposts, just like in 2007, 2008. This was the affected area. We put zones around. A majority of those early cases were culled. Individual animals were culled, trying to sort of stamp out any viremic animals, so animals that have got the virus circulating in the body, hoping that they were just bitten by Dutch or French midges, and that would be trying to squash that. But it didn't take long for us to know that this virus was going back into the local midge population. So these zones have changed over time, as you'll be very well aware, and also the policy in terms of culling stopped quite quickly because it seemed no point, and then the idea was to try and just kind of keep the virus circulating, and infected midges as far over on the east side of the country as possible. We talk about these outbreaks. This was the 2023-2024 outbreak, and started in November, rolled over into March. We called the last case on the 8th of March as being the last in that outbreak, and then we moved into the low vector period. A lot of trapping of midges, using to monitor to see if the midges were feeding, and that is used to determine when they reckoned there was a very low number of midges feeding, then that was the end of the that outbreak, and it went into a low risk period. Back in 2024, 2025, again, maps you might be familiar with. The first case was in August, and then quickly we had quite a lot of cases. This pinky area is the zones which now then became a restriction zone. We were trying to keep the tide back to try and protect the higher, more livestock dense area, which on this map, this map also shows the blue patches here are obviously the higher dense. This is where the livestock is, so much more livestock on this western side of the country, and trying to keep the wave of disease back. So therefore there was restrictions about moving out of the restriction zone. So you'll be, though that might not have affected you directly, or may have done if you were trying to bring animals across country, you're aware of those. And this boundary was tested, and we did a lot of surveillance work along this boundary, trying to be sure that it was in the right place. It was moving very regularly, as you know. We did have one rogue case of Bluetongue 12. So there you go. That's a different serotype, bit random, only one. Didn't come to anything else. That was a bit of a relief. And we started to see cases of transplacental transmission. So when we were having started to get reproductive problems starting to develop into the current season. This officially started on the 1st of July, so earlier than last year. And the first case was confirmed on the 10th. So these now are cases that have overwintered. So these are not from new incursions coming over from France or Holland. These are from cases that are popping up because of our local midges are infected, or we've got virus overwintering in stock, so that is basically recognizing it's established. And very soon, I think it was about May, June time, wasn't it, when the restriction zone was basically put across the whole country. So now all of England is now in one restriction zone. It was really when it was recognized that there was no way we could keep it back. And there was obviously important trade issues, because it does allow movement now within the restriction zone. And clinical cases are coming up. We're getting pre-movement tests, private tests that are all picking up the positive cases. Just as an idea here of the timeline. So back in winter, the first winter, really very few clinical signs. Clinical signs were more apparent in the following summer. Reproductive issues over winter, that following winter, and then more clinical signs with sheep, more affected now than they were before. And we're really not sure where we are going into September. But this message here at the bottom here is that what will this season bring? And are we just going to be following what's happened in the EU? Reproductive, again, this is a bit of a worry. There's been quite a lot of some studies on those calves that have been found to be affected with brain lesions, but also other fertility problems. So poor fertility in obviously cows and ewes and rams and bulls. More information is available around cattle. That's probably for a number of reasons. APHA have been studying certain farms and trying to get a bit more of a quantitative look at the impact of these reproductive issues with Bluetongue. But you can see here poor fertility, abortion, stillbirth, as well as some clinical signs in the calves. So hopefully these videos will work. Just these very sad, very dumb calves, blindness, stargazing, and this very like a dumb calf. You can see from it doesn't really know what it's doing. So although we're getting more reports in calves, we think probably more in sheep, it's probably more around the fertility of rams. The damage to the brain affects is generally in what is called in the middle trimester of pregnancy, so the middle third, and it may be that in sheep, because of that middle third period of pregnancy is generally in a low vector period, we might not be seeing so many of these these dumb calves, or the same presentations in lambs as we are in calves, but also it's also been the virus has been mainly circulating in low livestock dense areas, so then we haven't really got the full picture yet. Moving on just on the framework, as I say, it's had to evolve very quickly over the last couple of years as we've been dealing with this. There's been a massive amount of surveillance going on. This is just one of the maps that was produced about showing the surveillance along where the restriction zone was at that time, and then obviously it moved as we found cases along this line had to shift. Lots of tracing. So all these little green triangles and dots are tracings from cases that were picked up to try and see if the spread had seeded into these higher dense areas. Lots and lots of work going on. Obviously, and also from the lab side, from some pharmaceutical side, lots of work going on in development into the different vaccines, which Charlotte will pick up shortly in her presentation. Vaccination is a different approach than we had in 2007, 2008, but it's this is just a recent mapping of where the vaccines have been purchased and used for cattle in the blue and sheep in the green. Obviously, it does need to be considered along with where the livestock themselves are. But again, I'll let Charlotte pick that up. Just so the vaccine works in both ways, it helps to reduce that viremia. So when you've got these animals which have got virus circulating in their body, the vaccine can hit that, stop that, reduce the risk of that being a reservoir. It also helps to develop the neutralizing antibodies, the immune response. So it's got a bit of a double whammy, which is important to remember because it's important to trying to stop that transmission. Latest updates. Everything this government, the UK gov.uk is really the go-to for latest situations if you want to keep track of what's going on. In this recent vector season, we've got 16 cases, so they're going up pretty regularly, not in large numbers, and there may only be a few animals on each farm, as we know. It's nothing like because it doesn't spread from animal to animal. It's got to go through the midge. We get odd number of just individual animals. There was some deer. And then there's clinical cases. Pre-movement testing is picking up. So these cattle are probably going into Scotland or into Wales. And then there's quite a lot of private testing, but we are getting clinical cases in sheep. The whole of England is now considered to be a high risk of transmission, and probably most of GB, but obviously at the minute, Wales and Scotland are still putting up barriers to try and keep it out of there. And Wales are starting to open up some of trying to ease some of the impact of restrictions on trade, about easing to let them attend cattle coming over from the border to tend Welsh markets in England, but it's still restrictions. If any of this information applies to you, the way your business needs to run, then I would definitely recommend that you keep an eye on the gov.uk website, but also the Welsh government and the Scottish government websites for up-to-date information. And yeah, so just as a reminder here, so with restriction zones where it is, you can move freely within these zones, or animals can, no need for any licenses. If you were moving germinal products, so semen and ovum and things like that, there are still some licenses, because we do know that they do need to be, they potentially can transmit the virus, and there are licenses required for moving Scotland and Wales. And very last, really, to say, just remember that although we are getting used to Bluetongue being around, we're having to adapt what we advise and how we farm. It is still a notifiable disease. That means it is a legal requirement for you to report it. Although we're not going to be, we might not be responding in the same way as we used to. We need to keep these reported. We might need to be doing samples. We've got to be mindful of the other serotypes sneaking in, which might mean the vaccines we're using might not be so effective. And also there's that ongoing threat. We don't want to be missing any other notifiable disease, and obviously FMD is in that list. And just a flag to the really good resource available on the AHDB website, which again I think get picked up by Charlotte. I think you're going to pick up that as well in your presentation. So these are very, very good, up-to-date resources. Okay, I think that's me. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening. Thank you very much, Rebecca. That was very comprehensive and a thorough update there. A lot of interesting information you had. Apologies, first of all, that at the start of the meeting that my internet and technical abilities here in Mid Devon wasn't quite up to scratch. So we're going to hand over. Hopefully, Ian's said at the start. We're going to hand over now to Katie Evans, who is farming on a family farm up in Norfolk, Suffolk border. They've got a beef and sheep farm over a 2,000 ewe plus flock, and they have had cases of Bluetongue on farm last year. And she's going to give us an update of her experiences and hope some of the consequences of having the disease on farm. So good evening, Katie. I'll hand over to you.
Hello, thank you, Jonathan. So yeah, I'm a sheep and beef farmer from Norfolk. We're right on the Norfolk-Suffolk border. I farm with my family, my parents, and my brother and sister. We lamb just over 2,000 ewes, 3 different flocks. We've got a performance recorded flock of clins, a shedding flock, so we're breeding them to, they're home-bred shedders, put to ex-Lana rams, so they shed their own wool. And we've also got Hebrideans as well. And we've got a suckler herd of 60 cattle. We were originally stabilizer, but we're moving down the native breed route, and we're now building up a Sussex herd of cattle. So last year we were pregnancy scanning the cows in beginning of September, and 2 heifers came up quite slowly. And once they were in the crush, we could see that they had crusting around the nose and bloodshot eyes. So we sent videos to our vets, and this was, I think we were case number 14. So it was being spoken about, but not quite completely hot topic at the time. But we sent the videos to our vets, and they said, get in touch with APHA. So we phoned APHA, and they came out the following day. They came out very quickly. On the day they took the bloods from the 2 heifers, and we also described a ram that we had treated for what we thought was pneumonia that morning. And they decided they better have a look at him as well, and they took bloods from him. And on closer inspection of his mouth, he did have ulceration in his mouth. He was very lethargic, not willing to walk, excessive drooling, and he had a high temperature. Interestingly, the heifers didn't have a high temperature. They weren't lame, although they were slower to come up. And when the bloods came back, the 2 heifers were negative and the ram was positive. We're not really sure what caused those symptoms in those heifers. Maybe fly irritation is the only thing we could put it down to. But we had movement restrictions put on our holding from the day APHA came out, and those movement restrictions lasted for 6 weeks, and no animals on, no animals off holding. And at the time there was no exit strategy, so that was just it for then, and we didn't really know what was going on. Luckily the APHA vet that came out, so we have a separate store lamb finishing business. We buy in around 5,000 lambs a year starting in September through to March, and he could see that that was operating completely separately to our home farm. We do that for biosecurity because we're a closed flock, and it's a completely separate business. So the movement restrictions were only put on the home farm and the breeding stock, and not the store lamb finishing business, which would have been a complete nightmare having sheep on arable farms in electric, not being able to move. However, the restrictions on the breeding stock, we sell rams and breeding females, so we estimate that we missed out on about £90,000 worth of breeding sales that year, and we took more sheep through the winter because of it and had to feed more sheep. We also had some trouble with where we would usually send animals to slaughter, so we'd send some to Wales, but they weren't taking animals out of restricted zones. That was even when we weren't locked down ourselves, because we were within the restriction zone. We couldn't send our lambs to where we were sending them in Wales, which created a headache. But looking back, it created new relationships with new abattoirs and has actually opened new doors. So silver linings. Come scanning time, the sheep scanned quite poorly, down 20%. Weirdly, not necessarily, a lot more barreners. We had less multiples and a lot of singles, and a few other local farmers said the same. So I don't know how that can be and whether that is a Bluetongue thing, but we had a fertility issue. We did have a few empties in the cows, but not really anything to be concerned about. Lambing time, we actually had a really good year, low mortality and very good weather for lambing. That could also be linked to lower multiples, meaning less mortality. However, in the calving, we had one stillborn deformed calf and 2 very slow, like Rebecca was saying, probably brain damaged. They couldn't feed on their own. One of them would turn around in circles a lot, and we found that one just randomly dead in the straw one day, and the other one we ended up euthanizing. At the time, we had no idea that these could be Bluetongue symptoms, but looking back, having had conversations with our vets and conversations with other farmers, we now can see that that probably was Bluetongue. So hopefully all of you can now see, this is the ram that we tested. You can see in his mouth he's got those ulcers and he's drooling a lot, and he was just really, really lethargic. In response to the poor fertility, really, and seeing how quickly an animal can go downhill from it, we have now vaccinated all of our breeding animals. We vaccinated the cows pretty quickly. Sheep took a little bit more thought, but now we think it's definitely the right thing to do, weighing up the cost of having another year of poor fertility. And livestock farmers are used to vaccinating. It's just another vaccine. It's not hard to plan it into the year. So it's definitely a no-brainer, I think, to protect ourselves from it, knowing how bad it can be. That ram dying within 3 days, it was quite horrible to see. Another driver behind vaccinating was to boost customer confidence again and try and get our breeding sales going. We were worried that was going to become a pattern, and we wouldn't be in a position to sell breeding stock from where we are in the east if Bluetongue was going to be this issue every year. But with vaccination, hopefully we'll be okay. And this year, breeding sales have been fine. Tips looking back: plan vaccinating carefully because of the bottle sizes are a bit inconvenient. We used, it's called Voltavar or something like that, and the bottles are 50 doses. So try not to waste the vaccine, and because once the bottle's opened, you've got to use it within a certain amount of hours, and it's quite expensive. And also, whilst vaccinating, scan EIDs, because you need to report the vaccine on the government website, and they'll ask for individual ear tag numbers. Also, so we got the restrictions lifted by proving the ram had died, but we found out we needed to do this 5 weeks after he died. Luckily, we had a paper trail from the knacker man, but take advice from your vet or whoever disposes of your dead stock, because I'm not sure what the current exit strategy is, but you might need to prove an infected animal has died. I think that's about it from me, but yeah, I do recommend vaccinating, because weighing up the poor fertility, if it was Bluetongue, which is likely because we had it on farm, and that was likely the cause of the calving issues, it's a no-brainer for us financially to pay for the vaccine.
Great, thank you, Katie. That sounds that's a great update that you've given us of the practicalities of having it on farm and your experience of it. It sounds like you've built a good relationship with your sort of APHA team up there, and they sort of seem to have been pretty forward thinking with your business, and hope it sounds like you did have a lot of sort of financial stress and things like that with it, but hopefully you've overcome that, and yours as a business and as a family, you'll come out stronger from it. So we're going to move on to our last presenter this evening. I don't know if Ian mentioned at the start, but we do have a question and answer forum as well for people. So we're hoping that the attendees that we've got, I can see we've got 50 on screen, that hopefully we'll get a few questions at the end. So if we can start thinking about some questions for our presenters to send across, and I can ask them at the end, and hopefully we'll get a bit of a sort of a chat and a discussion going. So our final one is Charlotte Mouland. She's a vet and with Synergy Farm Vets. She's based in Chard, Somerset, and also there's a family farm at home as well. So she's going to, good evening, Charlotte. She's going to give us an update on a vet's perspective of the Bluetongue endemic.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'll just try and share my screen. Fantastic, thank you, Aaron. I'm Charlotte Mouland, a sheep vet at Synergy Farm Health. We're a large independent practice covering Devon to Hampshire. I was asked this evening to chat a bit about the BCV3 vaccination, and importantly how sheep farmers can work with their vets to make farm-specific decisions about Bluetongue vaccination. As a practice, we've seen a big uptake in vaccination across sheep, beef and dairy units. So hopefully I can answer some of the questions that we've been asked by our clients sort of this year. Next slide, please. So as we've heard so far from Rebecca and Katie, we're heading into sort of, well, we're in now the third year of sort of high-risk season in the UK. We're now seeing cases across England since July the 10th, and those cases are now due to overwintered midges. So we know that Bluetongue is circulating in our own midge population. We're likely to see more cases now as the virus spreads into more densely populated livestock areas. as we've heard already, Bluetongue came across from the east. And as you can see from these graphics, the darker the colour, the higher the population of sheep in the green on the left and cattle in the blue. We are expecting the peak this year to be in September, which is obviously isn't very far away now. Next slide, please. Our best defence against Bluetongue remains as vaccination. So in September last year, 3 different BTV3 vaccines came available in the market in England, and in March this year they became available for use in Scotland and in Wales. Next slide, please. So importantly, I think this evening we need to dispel any myths around BTV3 and vaccination. I know there's been some noise within the industry about the effects of vaccine on fertility. There is no evidence to suggest that the vaccines have any negative effects on fertility. Remember, these vaccines have been used widely across the continent as well as in the UK. BTV3, Bluetongue, however, does pose a real threat to the long-term fertility of infected animals. So I would encourage you to raise any queries or concerns with your own vet. And as with any veterinary medicine, there is a requirement to report any adverse effects. So these can be investigated appropriately. Next slide, please. So just lots of words on this slide, not to worry about the detail, but just to highlight the 3 different vaccines that are available. They are either a 1-dose or a 2-dose for sheep, all subcutaneous injections, and the onset of immunity is at least 3 weeks from completing the course, depending on which vaccine is used. Currently, there is no booster interval established for the vaccines. That requires the vaccines being used for a while and then challenged to see how long they provide protection for. So that work is currently underway. However, if we extrapolate from some of the different Bluetongue strain vaccines that are used in Europe, the revaccination interval is usually annually. So we are expecting similar for these BTV3 vaccinations. Next slide, please. So if you've not vaccinated your flock already, you might have some questions about how vaccination might fit into your calendar, particularly with autumn sales and tupping approaching. At this point of year, given that we are in high-risk season and heading towards peak, I would urge you to consider vaccinating ASAP. Remember that it takes at least 3 weeks for the onset of immunity. Points to consider. The vaccines are safe to use during pregnancy. However, those first few weeks of pregnancy where implantation is occurring are very high risk for doing any management activity with sheep. So really we need to avoid sort of handling these sheep in that period. And ideally we vaccinate the ewes ahead of tapping. The data sheets for all the vaccines say vaccine safety not established in breeding males. That applies to lots of veterinary medicines, largely because they've not been tested in rams specifically. However, often these are the most valuable animals on farm. As a vet practice, we have vaccinated lots of bulls and lots of rams, and across the continent in the UK, the vaccine's been used in breeding males with no reports of issues. However, we would urge you to, where possible, vaccinate rams, ideally before the 6 to 8 week lead up to tapping. And that's because the same as any vaccination, it carries a small risk of causing a fever. So as the immune system does its bit to mount an immune response and generate antibodies, that could temporarily interfere with semen production. So ideally, we vaccinate our rams in good time ahead of tapping. Another concern for flocks might be the potential risk of introducing Bluetongue when buying in replacements this year. Now we're not pre-movement testing animals in England. There is a risk that we could move asymptomatic carrier animals into your holding. Remember, there's no direct sheep-to-sheep transfer, so transmission relies on local midges biting the infected animal and transferring the virus. As a rule of thumb, for all diseases, we should be quarantining animals for a minimum of 21 days. So during this period, we can monitor for bluetongue and other infectious diseases. You may need to consider whether, when you're buying in sheep, whether purchased animals are vaccinated. And it might be worth asking your own vet practice if they're running any vaccine days, if you need a small number of doses, for example, for a few bought-in rams. Next slide, please. Another consideration might be using other vaccines. Many flocks will be thinking about getting abortion vaccines into their ewes or clostridial vaccines up together in their lambs. A question we've been asked a lot is whether people can use BTV3 vaccines at the same time as other vaccines. The vaccine companies will all say these vaccines have not been tested alongside other products, so they cannot say for certain on the safety or efficacy of using other products at the same time. In an ideal world, we'll leave an interval of, say, up to 2 weeks between different vaccines. However, we have had lots of clients use vaccines lots in combination, and so have other farmers up and down the country. I would say if you are pressed for time, work with your vet directly to work out the best plan. There was a big push in the spring to vaccinate ahead of the high-risk mid-season, partly to get colostral protection for lambs in the first few months of life, and partly because in the peak season, there's a small risk of inadvertently spreading bluetongue from animal to animal via needle, which Rebecca touched on. Effectively, that needle's behaving like a midge. First off, the risk of this is probably very small, and it requires us to, inadvertently draw blood from one infected animal and inject it into the next. And also this is if you've got bluetongue in your area, then likely your midges are infected too. It is sensible to take some reasonable precautions when doing any vaccinations in the high risk season. So changing needles regularly, using a stereomatic system if you've got one, or cleaning needles between animals using surgical spirit as we do for TB testing. So some other questions that we've been asked in the practice. So how effective will the BTV3 vaccine be for my flock? Well, of the sheep with clinical signs in the UK in 2024, and the mortality rate has been found to be around 70%, which is similar to that we've seen on the continent. Vaccination is not perfect. It doesn't mean that a farm will not face infection, but we do have good evidence to show that it will reduce mortality. Some work in Germany found that vaccinated flocks experienced a mortality rate of 1 to 2% compared with 25 to 30% in unvaccinated flocks. Will mandatory vaccination be introduced? There's no indication that this is the way the government will go, or that the vaccine will be funded. So it is up to farmers and their private vets to make an informed decision on vaccination. Just to signpost you here to the AHGB cost calculator. This is a resource that's been developed. You can find it on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website where there is a whole bluetongue hub. You can put in your number of ewes, number of lambs, the cost of vaccine, which will be specific to your vet practice and which sort of brand of vaccine you're using, and it will give you scenarios on how much you're spending or saving according to whether your flock experiences a mild, moderate or severe sort of hypothetical infection. This is based on some modelling, and there will be some assumptions, but it is a good way to work with your vet and make some decisions on vaccinations. So if I vaccinate my animals, will this affect moving my sheep? So as we've touched on, there's no movement restrictions in place in England. If sheep are moving to Wales or Scotland and require pre-movement testing, vaccination does not interfere with the test, but it's ideally you leave a week interval from vaccinating to testing, because there can be a short-term viremia, and you may get some false positives in that first week. At this point, I would signpost you to the Bluetongue movements checker, which can also be found on the Ruminant Health and Welfare's Bluetongue hub. It has the most up-to-date information on movements. You can put in where you're moving sheep from and to, for example, from England into a Welsh abattoir or onto a Scottish farm, and it will give you links to the specific movement licenses you need to apply for, and details of pre-movement tests if required. Cattle at the moment are exempt from pre-movement testing if they're vaccinated with the Bull Tarvo 3 vaccine. And this is because it's been proven that the vaccine prevents cattle from becoming viremic. So effectively, it prevents them infecting midges. Work is currently underway to try and demonstrate the same for sheep. So watch this space. And finally, another important question we get asked is, will dipping my sheep or porons prevent midges biting? So unfortunately, there's no evidence to suggest that, or to support that insecticides will reduce the risk of bluetongue. And that's because they have a very short activity against midges. And as Rebecca's demonstrated, it only takes one infected midge to cause infection. So there's not good evidence to support that, unfortunately. Next slide, please. So do we need to vaccinate for any of the other serotypes of bluetongue? So at present, there's only BTV3 circulating in the UK. There is some BTV8 in France and Spain, but we are constantly monitoring the risk of those coming in, or other serotypes coming into the UK. And as Rebecca spoke about, there's no vaccines that cover multiple different serotypes of bluetongue available on the market. Just a reminder at this point, again, that it is a notifiable disease, and you must report any suspicious cases. When they undertakes sampling to confirm cases, part of the work that's done then is to type the bluetongue. So we are constantly monitoring if there's any other serotypes entering the UK. And just to touch on the recording requirements, so farmers that are administering any of the bluetongue vaccines do need to record the use of the vaccine on the government website. The links at the bottom of the screen here, your vets will provide it to you when they provide the vaccine for you. You need to report it within 48 hours of using the vaccine. It's just an online form, basic information, CPH number, farm details, batch numbers of the vaccine, dates of administration, and the individual ID of the vaccinated animals. So it gives you a little box which you can fit a few numbers, a few IDs in there. That's really designed for small flocks. If you're vaccinating a larger flock, there is an email address. And what I would suggest is you just email your Excel list of numbers over. As Katie mentioned, a stick reader does facilitate this quite nicely. If you don't have a stick reader, it might be worth asking your vet practice if they're able to hire one to you, or if you've got a neighbour that might be able to lend you one for that purpose. That does make the whole process a lot simpler. Next slide, please. Just to signpost those resources that I've mentioned tonight, the Ruminant Health and Welfare website has got some fantastic resources for farmers, and links to the AHDB information as well. So I would direct you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was a great update, and some great advice there from yourself on what we should be doing on farm and practically on the ground. So I think we've got a couple of questions which we can move on to now. So hopefully, if either Rebecca, Katie, or Charlotte, they want to pipe up and sort of answer them. So first of all, I can see. Oh, hang on. Sorry, the screen's just moving now. So we've got a first of all question is, what is the advice if we want to vaccinate lambs with slaughter tags only that will go into the food chain at just under 1 year old? Do we have to go to the extra expense of double tagging? So that, any ideas on the rules of tagging?
I'm not aware that the tagging, recording the tags, is to be able to identify animals that have been vaccinated. I'm not aware that they will need to be double tagged, but I mean that's something I can find out for you. I'd probably best that I can double check on that. As far as I understand, as long as they're individually identifiable, which the sort of tag would do, the one single tag would do. I'm not aware they have to be double tagged. Can I get back to
the slaughter tag? Should,
isn't it?
Sorry, Rebecca. Slaughter tag should have individual EID numbers, so it should flag up on your EID device. Even though it's visibly the same flock number, it's going to have an individual ID on EID, so that should overcome that problem.
Yeah.
Have you haven't had any problems, Katie, with your store lamb sort of business that you've got going? Have you had to vaccinate all of them as well?
No, and to be honest, I don't think we will. We're more concerned about the breeding animals. The store lambs are not on farm for very long. We'll obviously watch how everything plays out, but we won't be vaccinating fattening lambs.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to the next question, and that is from sorry, I should have said that was Philip Saunders that asked that first question, and Jane Taylor has asked, can you advise why Wales allow vaccinated cattle across the border into Wales but not vaccinated sheep?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, and Jane's right. That is the current situation. Movement of Wales. Obviously, these are licensed moves. You can sheep would need pre-movement testing, but not the vaccination. It's not for unvaccinated. For vaccinated sheep cannot be licensed to Wales. Again, whether that's a Welsh decision by Welsh government, or all the licenses requirements that may be issued in England are written on basically the terms decided by Welsh government or for Scotland. Whether it's some assurances about tags or certainty about that ID, I'm not too sure. Again, I don't mean to be dodging the bullet, but I'll take that to the Welsh teams and ask them. But it must be whether it's unless, Charlotte, you've had any confidence with the vaccinations, or
I think in part it was because they've proven in cattle that it doesn't the vaccine prevents viremia, so that the midges won't be infected. They've not demonstrated that completely in sheep yet. So if they're able to do that, I think that was my understanding of it. That might change the requirements.
Confidence around the vaccine.
Correct.
Yeah.
In terms of infecting midges.
How much sort of collaborative thinking is there on the cross borders between England, Wales, and Scotland? Is it sort of quite open lines of communication, or
There's open lines of communication. There's a lot of communication, but I mean they are standing quite strong with their with the borders, with keeping the restriction and not to become restricted within the restriction zone, trying to keep the disease out. I mean, so far all the positive cases have been in England, There have been a number of report cases this week actually in Scotland and Wales, but none of them have been confirmed. So it's Welsh government and Scottish government do have that prerogative that they can be quite different to the way England works, and I think the pressure for trade in England was considerable in terms of why we went to the full zone covering the whole country. But they are, because they're that much further away from the new incursions, they feel at the moment they can try and keep them out of the restriction zone, and for obviously mainly for trade purposes. So it's their prerogative. It's for them to decide, and we do find that they, although we are literally obviously 1 GB, they can become quite different, quite some different opinions on what policy they apply. But we'll watch the space. I mean, there are, as I say, there are some shifts. Obviously, they'll be under quite a bit of pressure from their own farmers. So this new allowing Welsh farmers to bring into markets in England within 20 kilometres of the border to be able to be sold and back in. So that's quite a concession, trying to, again, probably under pressure from the Welsh farmers themselves, trying to open up a bit more trade for them. But it's ultimately, there's a lot of conversation, but they are of a different mindset at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions here which are sort of along the same sort of line, so I think we can cover them both. So Abby and Joe Shipton have asked sort of similar questions, and Abby's asked, is there any cover passed on to lambs if ewes are vaccinated prior to lambing, and how long does that last? And Joe's asked, when should I vaccinate breeding ewe lambs from ewes that were vaccinated in February? So yeah,
I can take that one. So yeah, we do believe there's some colostral protection of lambs, and we're sort of informed that up to 3 months cover. So if we vaccinate ewes pre-lambing, so we had a lot of flocks in the practice targeting their vaccine ahead of lambing this spring for that reason. So lambs were protected if we had an early mid-season. With regards to vaccinating breeding ewe lambs, this disease isn't age specific. Any age of sheep is vulnerable. So ASAP, we just need to, the things we need to be careful of are vaccinating in early pregnancy and trying to avoid vaccinating rams in the lead up to topping.
So how quickly can we, sorry, I might have just missed that. So we're advising not to vaccinate rams within 6 to 8 weeks, but what about ewes pre-topping? Is there a time period before that?
No, it's just so they are at risk of having a temperature spike as well. But really, I think just getting it in before breeding. There's not that 6 to 8 week period, but ideally before topping. I think lots of flocks will be timing it probably a couple of weeks either side of their abortion vaccines, if they're thinking of doing it ahead of topping.
And just moving forward on the vaccination, if we're vaccinating this year, when should we be looking to vaccinate next year if we're seeing a Bluetongue outbreak? Are we similar sort of timings, or are we advising to go pre-lambing to get that sort of pass over to the lambs a bit?
So it depends really on what information we get with regards to how long the vaccine lasts. So when we get that booster interval information, we'll be able to guide flocks better. If it's an annual booster, it might be that we may be able to do it as such. I don't think we've got any information at the minute to suggest that we need to do it more frequently than that, but I think watch this space at the moment. Okay.
So we've got another question from Chris Stewart, and he's asked, is there any midge or virus over winter in England? Are there any preventives like using more open fields and orchards, or avoiding fields with ponds, etc.?
Yeah, well, I can. The discussion about whether the midge overwintering, the midge can overwinter obviously within the an animal is called the viremia, which with cattle in particular, we know that, and it can last for about 60 days, maybe plus in cattle. So certainly can go over a winter period from one outbreak over winter in the cattle, and then be ready to be basically infect fresh midges the following year. The midge is, once the midge is infected with the virus, it's basically carries that for its whole life. But midges, I reckon, they usually live up to about 30 days, maybe a little bit longer, 40 days. So it depends on the weather, the type of winter it is, and whether how long the midges will actually survive. So there is potential for the virus to remain within a midge that goes from one through the low period from one outbreak to the next, so potentially overwintering in the midge. But because of the life that the midge has such a shorter life, then it's less likely. But it depends on the climatic conditions and how severe our winters are. Then that's potential that it could. And other preventatives like using more open fields and orchards and avoiding fields and ponds. Well, we do know that some areas of the farms will be more, perhaps feel there's more midges, but it's not many midges are required to obviously. It's very efficient at transmitting them from the midge to the animal. It's very efficient. I guess there's advice in terms of of using some areas perhaps more where, but use the insecticides, and also I don't know what your advice is around use of insecticides, Charlotte, but it might help, but it's not very reliable, is it?
Yeah, so it's nothing as the insecticides have very short activity on midges, so there's nothing to support that will reduce the risk. There is some work to say that windy, well ventilated sheds or fields are better than poorly ventilated sheds. So I think that's in some consideration. And yeah, I think any sort of standing water where we can visibly see midges is obviously, that's a higher risk area. So if you can, that's another sort of take on it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think also it's even on these mild winter days when we go out, we often do see midges, but the actual it doesn't necessarily mean midges are actually feeding. So midges just being present doesn't actually mean they're feeding. And then there are also the development of the virus within the midge itself. So once the midge sucks up blood which has got virus in, it has this extrinsic incubation period within the midge, and that is dependent on temperature as well. It could be, if temperatures are very low, it might be so slow that development within the midge that by the time basically the midge could actually die before that virus has actually matured enough, because of this extrinsic incubation period within the midge is very temperature dependent as well. So it's a bit of a lottery really, about that things have to be lined up. If the midges are feeding in warmer weather, the cycling within the midge is much quicker. In colder weather, even when the midges are not feeding so much, they're not taking as much virus, but the development within the midge is much slower, and they'd say the midge might have already died by then because of their short lifespan. So it's things lining up makes it. That's why there's a lot of work to set up traps to try and define the end of the high vector period and the beginning of the low vector period or low risk period, and they set up traps at various parts of the country, looking at trapping midges and looking at particularly the female midges, because the female midges are the ones that suck up. So you can actually see the blood in the bellies of these midges, and there's below a certain percentage is when they basically make a call saying, okay, these midges are not feeding to a very low level of feeding, so we're moving into that's the call for the going into the low vector period. It's based on actually what the midges are doing. And knowing the midges might be there, but they may not be feeding.
So when do we, on last year's data, when I know it's difficult with the weather patterns and Mother Nature, but when was the end of the high risk period last year compared to this, and then they go into low?
Well, it was, I think it was March. I remember. I think it was March last year. I think the high vector period started at the beginning of July this year. That's the beginning of the new outbreak, basically. Last year, I think it was. It went in. It closed in. It overwintered. End of March was the end of the low vector period. End of the low vector period, and then it started again in July. So it wasn't for very long. It wasn't a low vector period. Wasn't for very long. Before our winters are shorter now and milder, so it wasn't actually for a very long period.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, we'll really we want to hope for sort of a bit of a cold snap there in the winter to sort of try and stop a few of these midges.
I think it go cold, but also the length of the cold period. You know that when if midges are basically, the longer the midges aren't feeding for, the more likely they're going to die out. So it goes out in it so that the level of virus in midges, which is always going to be probably the less likely way it overwinters. But recognizing that midges can survive at least 30 days. But in the cattle, you've got probably about 60 days of the viremia. Obviously with the vaccinated, if they're vaccinated, you're trying to reduce that risk of viremia. They're saying the vaccine works in helping to reduce the viremia, the circulation virus within the animal, but also boosting its own immunity and developing antibodies to the disease itself. So if you've got vaccinated animals, the risk of viremia and overwintering substantially reduces.
Okay. So we've got another final question, not as a final question, we've got another question from Kerry Hardy, who is asking, is it more advisable to vaccinate prior to tupping rather than after? Will the fertility be affected by the decision? So this goes back to the rams, I think. So yeah, we just reiterating that we're advising to vaccinate 6 to 8 weeks beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, vaccine pre-tapping advisably, absolutely.
She also asked if a ewe tests positive for Bluetongue, will vaccinating the next year have an effect on a positive animal?
It's a really good question. We think that natural exposure will develop good immunity that will last for a few years. But I guess the difficulty is in a flock level, as we don't know who's seen the virus and who hasn't. That's why we sort of have to take the approach of vaccinating the population, I suppose. So it won't do any harm to vaccinate them. It might boost their natural immunity, but we just don't know who's seen it and who hasn't.
Did you test any more, Katie? Did you test any more than just the ram that you had, or have you tested ewes or anything like that at home on the farm?
No, we didn't. So once we had the results back from that ram, our advice was to report any more clinical symptoms, and then they'd probably come out and test them. But we didn't have any more in the sheep. I know on some farms with smaller flocks, when APHA came out, they would test the whole flock, and quite often it did come up with other positives. But for us, it would have been too much to do at a time where they were quite stretched. But we haven't tested anything else. We did some pre-movement bloods and things like that, but not like surveillance on our own flock.
Yeah, that's in the very early days, early cases. there would have been quite extensive flock or herd testing to get an indication of the level of disease across that on infected animals. They may not be clinical, but if there was a clinical case, we would then go wild and take a number of obviously, I think the first cases was basically everything, but then that very quickly, because of the numbers of animals, very quickly came down to percentage of animals that were intermingling with the clinical case, but that also and then we did a lot of surveillance bleeding, a proportion of animals along over winter surveillance along the high risk areas, so along the south coast and up around the southeast coast to source surveillance, and along the boundary between the restricted zone and the free zone to try and get indication of level of disease. But it is a bit hit and miss. I mean, in large, you might just only get a few infected animals, but now we get an indication that we've proven, say, larger numbers of animals being tested as part of pre-movement or private testing. When we get a big group, we might get a 2 or 3% infected. It is quite variable, and obviously that will depend on the number of bitches, the weather conditions, about how midges are feeding. But to get a really good picture about the number of infected animals, you'd have to be testing an awful lot of animals, which would be extremely expensive. So vaccination is, as Charlotte would be saying, is on a herd or flock basis, not on a not trying to look for perhaps those naturally immune ones or the ones who are because it's like a needle in a haystack. You're really not going to be able to. You can do private testing, but it'd be very expensive to try and find those ones with natural immunity. And so really the approach would be herd vaccinations or flock vaccinations, or as Katie was saying, certain parts, perhaps the breeding stock that are going to be around for a while and a more valued animals.
That's great, thank you, Rebecca. So I think Emily Gascoigne's just summed it up perfectly, and she's just said it's excellent talks and thank you to all the speakers and organisers. So, and I'd just like to reiterate that fact. So thank you to all three of you for all of your presentations this evening. Hopefully we've got some great information out there for people who have been online listening, and that we can sort of hopefully all move forward with this disease in a positive manner. We hopefully fact checked a little bit and myth busted a bit as well. So hopefully we can all sort of move forward with sort of clearer heads and clearer thinking on the issues on the Bluetongue disease. I think we've recorded, I know that we've recorded this webinar, so if anyone wants to look back at it and look at any of the presentations again, will that be on the NSA website, I think? Ian?
Sorry, Aaron, you carry on.
We will circulate a link to attendees to watch this back and share that within their wider networks.
That'd be great. Thank you. That'd be brilliant. Thank you very much. So, Ian, have you got anything else to add to this evening?
No, it was just to say I will email out the link and the other pertinent links that Rebecca and Charlotte put into their presentations, and just to say thank you from me to everyone who managed to make it along this evening, and to Jonathan and Aaron for helping putting it on. No, it's much appreciated.
No, that's great. Just apologies again at the start there. Thank you, Ian, for stepping in. My link wasn't quite working as well as yesterday for some reason. So I had to draft in a laptop, my wife's laptop. Reiterate the fact. Thank you, Aaron, for organising this and being our IT man up at NSA head office. You seem to be a great addition to the team. So look forward to working with you in the future on things like this. And possibly this could be a few more subjects and topics we could look to do this. We'll review our webinar and have a look, see whether the South West region wants to do a bit more like this, and get a bit of feedback from people that were listening. So we're getting a few positive comments on the chat. So yeah, going to wrap it up, I think, now, if we're all happy to. And thank you once again to Rebecca, Charlotte, and Katie for all of your information and your sort of outlook and thoughts on this Bluetongue disease that we've got spreading across the country. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.